When did you realize you were dating an idiot? Story 1. While making KoolAid, she asked, "How much sugar does it need?" I replied, "It says on the package." "Just tell me," she insisted. Annoyed, I said, "1 cup." "Okay, there's only a 1/3 cup here." "Where is the one whole cup?" she asked again. "I don't know, just use the 1/3 cup," I grunted. "Well, how many scoops do I do then?" "It's 1/3 of a cup," I said, already feeling agitated. "I don't know fractions, just tell me," she simply said. I told her, "I'm not going to tell you, figure it out. It's 1/3 of a cup, how many do you think it would be?" "I don't know, just tell me," she exclaimed. "3," I muttered. The girl was 20 years old at the time. I'll never forget that. Addressing those who asked, it lasted 3 years, around 6 months in. I stayed because, as some of you suggested, Dark Souls. I guess I also rammed my head into a wall in relationships. It's strange how some people approach their own intelligence. It's as if she decided she didn't comprehend fractions and refused to even consider thinking about the problem. Her hate for math is just too strong, man. Story 2. We were out for drinks when he mentioned his tooth was hurting. Without hesitation, he simply yanked it out. It seemed pretty bad, but honestly, who does that? Also, he genuinely believed that having money meant you were a good person in the eyes of God, and only bad people were poor. The irony was, despite this belief, he struggled to secure enough work and frequently relied on handouts from his wealthy father. I was trying to navigate a breakup cautiously, especially since we worked close by, but he beat me to it, ending things because of my political vote in the election. He also believed that one regrows their cherry after 6 months of abstaining from intimacy. This conversation didn't happen right at the start, so it wasn't the initial sign of his odd beliefs. But about a year into our relationship, we were discussing this with 2 friends, and his belief wasn't based on anatomy or religious ideals. He simply thought that 6 months without intimacy magically restored one's cherry. Quite stupid, really. Story 3. She called to RSVP to a surprise party, but ended up reaching the person for whom the party was meant. When I asked her how she didn't realize it, she claimed the invitation wasn't clear. I checked the invitation, it clearly stated in big letters, "Shh, it's a surprise party." This was a surprise bridal shower, so there shouldn't have been any confusion about who the party was for. The invitation explicitly said, "Don't tell, woman's name." I didn't fabricate this story. I know made up stories are pretty common here, but if the girl I was dating ruined a surprise party once bothers you, maybe this isn't the best place for you. Ultimately, it didn't matter because a valet accidentally spilled the beans in a more innocent way. He didn't know it was a surprise bridal shower. Surprisingly, the bride and her family were pretty relaxed about the whole thing. Story 4. We were lying beneath the stars when he inquired about their varying brightness. I explained the differences in size, brightness levels, and distances. His response was silence, filled with confusion. "You mean they're not stuck up there?" Lying there, I couldn't believe it, but it was true. Upon further discussion, I discovered he thought the night sky was akin to a dark blanket with stars affixed to it. The revelation that our sun was a star and the possibility of other stars having planets bewildered him. I felt crushed. I almost ended the relationship then and there. However, his earnestness led him to ask me to teach him, so I made an attempt. 2 years later, after numerous transient obsessions, our relationship ended. He worked with kids with special needs and did a really good job. He generally meant well. He aspired to become the world's leading expert in autism. Fine, good for him. So I took him to my university library, where he spent a day meticulously copying a textbook on autism line by line. When I asked how it was going, he said great. But during our conversation, I explained that becoming an expert in autism required more than just reading and copying books. It demanded research, genuine field involvement, and formal education. After that one library day, he never returned. I didn't stop him, he simply lost interest. This happened a lot. He'd get super excited about something and then abruptly lose interest the next day. The same pattern repeated after he watched the movie Rounders. He lived with a bunch of guys who didn't like him, though he was oblivious to it. He immediately organized a poker night and lost all his money. Being broke, he lost about $100, and I stopped him from taking loans for more gambling. Yet the next day, it vanished from his thoughts. The same fleeting interest occurred after watching Mission Impossible. where he wanted to try free mountain climbing. I suggested free skydiving instead. By this point, I was fed up with his quick changes. He laughed and it disappeared from his mind. His most enduring dream was to become a mortgage broker like his successful dad, but he struggled with math. Despite teaching him formulas, he couldn't grasp them. Once, he turned to me in frustration and asked, "Why do the numbers keep changing?" This almost rivaled the big blanket in the sky experience. Not knowing about space, the sun, and basic knowledge of our solar system seemed more profoundly deficient. For those wondering, he wasn't physically impressive. He wasn't particularly attractive either. He was sometimes sweet and well meaning, and he became increasingly violent over time. By the end, he controlled everything, and due to my low confidence, I felt responsible for his behavior. I left when things became physically toxic. He stalked me briefly until a change in my schooling allowed me to lay low, and he eventually left me alone. It ended 15 years ago, and since then I've married someone completely different, a highly intelligent man, the total opposite, and much more well endowed in many ways. Story 5. Driving down the road, and the moon is visible during the day. Her. How is the moon out at the same time as the sun? Me. Sometimes that happens. It's not that uncommon. Her. No, they are the same thing. How can we see both at the same time? Me. The sun and the moon are two different things. Are you serious? Her. Yeah, not everyone went to college like you, schoolboy. Me. Seriously? You learned that in second grade. She was in her early 30s. I've had a very similar conversation with a friend of a friend. She also refused to fly at night because she feared the plane might collide with the stars during the trip. She didn't want to risk it. I guess those girls were just so down to earth that they couldn't figure out what's going on up there in the cosmos. If you think these people skip their science class, you're going to flip out at what the girl did in Story 9. I can't help but facepalm. Story 6. First, she called me to inquire about the distance between 2-mile markers on the interstate. When I suggested subtracting one from the other to find the answer, she became argumentative and angry when I provided it. Secondly, she consistently refused to acknowledge simple facts I shared, leading me to stop discussing things with her. If I attempted to engage in a conversation about an academic article, she would often argue about the fundamental aspects rather than the article's subject itself. She seemed unable to acknowledge someone else's expertise. Third, her children, aged 11 and 16, lacked basic knowledge of U.S. geography. They even mocked my younger child, aged 8, for knowing the states and expressing a desire to visit different places. Lastly, her college major is misspelled on her Facebook page. Story 7. A roommate of mine was dating this girl, very cute and super sweet. We were all in the living room watching another roommate play Call of Duty World at War. It was still new at the time. At some point, she asked if the game was based on a true story. We explained that while the specific characters might not have existed, the game was based on World War II. Her response? What's World War II? We were taken aback. Are you serious? It was World War frickin' II. At another point, she even said, it's not like everyone knows about it. Yeah, Katie, the whole world knows about it. It was a world war. And not the first one either. Well, she probably slumped through history class. Maybe she thought, why sweat over something from way back when? Story 8. She boasted about holding a doctorate in emotionology. A doctorate. When I inquired about her master's thesis and dissertation, she gazed at me as though I were doing something absurd, like eating doorknobs. She insisted it was a legitimate field of study, demanding her friends address her as doctor during introductions. She manifested a ledger of unacceptable words and colors prohibited in her presence, convinced these words and colors emitted negativity and spawned evil, wreaking havoc, and so forth. One of the most frustrating aspects was meeting her bizarre circle of friends who fully embraced these notions. It felt as though stupidity could be transmitted and spread. That brief relationship could be a tale in itself. The sheer nonsense this person believed or concocted was astounding. Some completely rational concept seemed utterly foreign to her. For instance, the distinction between the light spectrum of color shades and pigment shades escaped her comprehension entirely. Story 9. She claimed her dad told her the giant wind farm fans in Central California were meant to cool things down, and she believed him. Me. When did he tell you that? When you were a kid? Her. No, just last year.
Also, I can't seem to get her to understand that Celsius and Fahrenheit measure the same thing. She thinks Celsius is cold and Fahrenheit is hot. Then I saw her watering her plastic plant for the third time. The first two times I was stunned and curious. The second time she actually said, "The water goes right through." Story 10. She went out for a run one day and returned saying an animal charged at her, prompting her to cut her run short. When I asked her what it looked like, she described it as like a cow but brown. Turns out it was a cow. She also believed that when I missed her call, the phone would continue ringing even after it went to voicemail. I'd receive about 3 voicemails a week, mostly silence with occasional impatient sighs. Story 11. My girlfriend and her best friend had an argument about whether Canada was a language or state. She was advocating that Canada was a state, which was considered the more reasonable stance. It's important to note she was 15 at the time, and we resided in the US. To avoid any confusion, in the US, we typically avoid using the term state to refer to countries, as it could be confusing with our own states. This was the point she was trying to make. Additionally, Canadian could be considered a dialect, but it doesn't constitute a complete language like English or Spanish, which was the other girl's perspective. Story 12. My ex, the eldest of 6 siblings, and I had been dating for about a week. We were both 20. During a conversation, I remarked, "You have wide hips for a man." His response was, "It's from carrying children." I was utterly confused until his youngest brother entered the room. My ex picked him up and placed him on his lap, as one does with toddlers. I had to sit him down and explain that wide hips don't come from physically carrying children around. Story 13. She threw a butter knife at a flickering light bulb in a crowded restaurant, simply because she didn't like the flickering. Then someone else told me she'd never been to France, yet I knew for a fact she visited Disneyland Paris every year. "Paris isn't France," she insisted. "We live in the UK, not the USA or anywhere else. You can literally drive from France to here." It's like saying London isn't England. Maybe your brain isn't in her body either. If you like my stories about people's minds taking a break, then give this video a big thumbs up and stay in the loop by subscribing to my channel. Story 14. She gave me mad libs, and when it was her turn to pick a noun, she asked, "What is a noun?" I explained it's a person, place, or thing. After a long silence, I assumed she was contemplating the most amazing noun ever. She said, "Place." She also once said, "Oh wow, Halloween is on Friday the 13th this year." Nope, not quite accurate. Then she referred to lingerie as linguine, like the pasta. Later on, she earnestly shared her belief that people with enough willpower can survive by photosynthesis. Story 15. I'd been dating this girl for a few months when Christmas rolled around. Things weren't super serious, but I cared enough to get her a gift. I found something perfect that connected to a funny incident involving her and my cat, so I made the present from the cat. I thought it was cute and that she'd get the joke. Instead, she got upset that my cat got her a gift and I didn't. I assumed she was kidding, but it got worse when her parents sided with her. It became incredibly awkward, and I realized things probably weren't going to work out. Story 16. He was getting his license renewed, and they asked him if he wanted to be an organ donor. He said no. When I asked why, he told me it was because he didn't want the government to come knocking for any of his organs when he still needed them. He really thought that becoming an organ donor meant that, anytime, his organs could be taken. Then I asked him about the class he was taking at community college. Him, "It's gonna be okay. Better than last year. I failed it twice." Me, "Must be a challenging class. What's it about?" Him, "Learning strategies." He failed a class about how to learn. Twice. Story 17. My girlfriend at the time genuinely believed it was the Headless Horseman who rode through Lexington and Concord shouting, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" Additionally, she once tried to argue that reaching the moon would be easier if we constructed a spaceship capable of traveling underwater. Her plan was to fly this spaceship through the ocean to reach the moon during the daytime rather than going straight up into space. That's bananas. It really makes me wonder if education's gotten too expensive or if some people just think they're too cool for school. Story 18. While we were out for dinner, he read the menu and asked, "What's a green bean?" I was shocked. How could someone not know what a green bean was? He clarified, "I know what a green bean is, but what is it?"
Another time, one of my rabbits hopped by him in the living room, and he yelled, "Oh my god, what's wrong with him?" Confused, I asked why. He wondered, why is he jumping like that? Did he hurt his legs? He'd never seen a rabbit hop before. He thought they moved like cats. Story 19. My boyfriend took me to a fancy restaurant where we ordered wine. When the waiter returned, he handed the cork to my boyfriend for a sniff. Instead, my boyfriend grabbed it and excitedly licked it like a lollipop. The waiter seemed uncomfortable, swiftly poured our glasses, and discreetly left. Also, he seemed fixated on talking about intimacy. Every conversation somehow led back to that topic, leaving no room for a normal chat. Next, he believed the Nation of Islam was a place. When I clarified that it wasn't, his response was, "Agree to disagree." Additionally, he argued that women could only be nurses, not doctors, and vice versa, claiming they were essentially identical professions distinguished only by gender. This belief persisted despite being in his early 20s. Story 20. He opted to avoid using the bathroom for number 2 during his stay in my student halls, which led to serious digestive issues after 10 days. To add context, my living space was confined to simple amenities: bedrooms, bathrooms, and kitchens, a half-hour walk from the university. At the start of our relationship, he cited anxiety in unfamiliar places with unknown people, which led to this decision. Also, he joined the Klan, despite me not being white. Then he wrote a love poem praising my brown eyes, despite them being green. It was a misguided attempt to impress me. It didn't work. He didn't get his chance to sleep with me. Story 21. In my defense, this happened back in 2004. Initially, I found his habit of making funny voices, making funny, quirky jokes, and occasionally calling me "my lady" charming and endearing. However, everything changed after I watched Anchorman. It dawned on me that he was essentially a 24/7 Ron Burgundy impression, overshadowing his actual personality. I began to wonder if I had ever truly met the real him. Also, while we were watching a movie, he inquired, "Where is this movie filmed?" I responded, "Massachusetts." Later on, a cop car marked Boston Police Department showed up on screen. With a mischievous glint, he turned to me and triumphantly declared, "Ha! Massachusetts? It's in Boston." I still love him though. Story 22. He answered his cell phone in the movie theater and had a loud conversation with his supplier during the movie. I admit, my judgment wasn't the best back then. I was young and not thinking straight. If I remember correctly, it was about grass. However, in Arizona in the 1990s, broadcasting that in a public place was a terrible idea. The movie we were watching was I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. He chose the movie. Story 23. Our first time cooking together made me realize it. I handed him a block of cheese to grate, and he turned to me and said, "I've never grated cheese before. How do you use this thing?" Then about half an hour later, he apologized for being vegan and mentioned, "Sorry about my dietary restrictions. Vegan recipes can be hard to find." He never mentioned being vegan until then. I told him if he was vegan, we couldn't use the cheese, and he responded, "Why would you think I couldn't have cheese? I'm vegan. I can have vegetables." He actually thought cheese was a vegetable and claimed to be vegan. Nope, never again. Story 24. When she thought flashing red lights on the road, like blinking traffic lights, meant we were entering a different time zone instead of indicating a stop sign, it left me dumbfounded. This happened in Northwest Indiana during our college days. I was doing my student teaching and had informed some kids that I would attend the fall play. However, due to my broken right ankle, she drove us to the event and shared this misconception during our journey there. Story 25. I dated a girl for 5 years who I convinced that Whoopi Goldberg was married to Gerard Depardieu. She really believed that the woman's full name was Whoopi Doopy Doo. On another date, while hiking along a trail I had researched online, we reached a fork, and I suggested, "Okay, now we need to go north." Her response threw me off. "Haven't we been going north this whole time?" I asked her further, feeling bewildered by her statement. She assumed north was merely the direction in front of us. It's a logic I'm still trying to understand. What is even more stupid is how she also believed that Al Qaeda was a lone criminal named Al. That Al guy must be friggin' tough if he can take on the military superpowers on his own. Story 26. When she asserted that babies could only result from love, stating that the only way pregnancy could occur from an offense was if you loved your offender. Later, at the grill house, she was astounded to discover that steak came from cows, and she was bewildered by the fact that bacon and gammon originated from the same animal. Another instance occurred while we were stargazing, and she suddenly asked, "Hey, do you think our sun might be a star?" She posed this question genuinely. Story 27. When she panicked because her third grader brought home erect on a spelling list and was nearly about to contact the school. Throughout her entire life, she genuinely believed that erect had no other meaning beyond describing a male body part, and she thought Scotland was its own island, as in separated by water. We live 30 minutes from the border. We reside in the east of England, and to clarify, despite some assuming otherwise, we've both lived in England our entire lives, making this misconception even more shameful. Story 28. When he confessed to me that he hadn't filed taxes in 4 years. It started when he worked for a guy who claimed it was under the table, so he didn't file a 1099. Turns out his employer reported his wages on the company books. Struggling to cover the taxes, instead of filing and arranging a payment plan, he chose to avoid filing altogether, hoping to evade detection. Story 29. We were young and about to fool around when I realized I didn't bring a rubber. That's when she assured me that I didn't need it because, as she put it, I trust my body not to get pregnant. Confused, I asked her to explain. She believed that getting pregnant requires conscious effort and that if she didn't want to conceive, she simply wouldn't. Well, it sounds like that girl has some serious mind power. Maybe she could use her Jedi mind trick to save the world. If you're in the mood for more hilarious stories, then be sure to check out What's Your This Person Is on Another Level of Stupid story. Couldn't stop laughing at story 2. See you there.